Hey, what's up? This is Justin Seymour from Skyline Studios. I also play guitar and I'm the producer for the Room Colored Charlatan. I'm making this video series to show you how I went about kind of the methods I use to mix our new record called the Veil That Conceals. If you haven't taken the time to kind of listen to that record, I suggest that you do so you have an idea of what I'm trying to show you and how I did it. I want to start with a couple of disclaimers. First of all, being new to making these videos, I don't really know how to make a video where I record the sound of my voice and also simultaneously be able to show you an accurate depiction of the mix. So basically, I'm only recording audio for my voice. So any sound you hear of instruments is going to be basically coming from my studio monitors into the microphone, which, as you know, will not particularly sound good. However, give the record a listen and you know that for the most part, obviously this is debatable. And opinionated, but for the most part, it sounds pretty good. So I'm going to show you how I went about doing it. So if you like the sound on that record, then I'm going to show you how I did it. Now, another disclaimer is I'm going to show you, since I'm showing you what I'm doing, I'm not claiming that what I do is actually the best way to do things or that it's the way that you should do things. I'm just going to show you what I do, and hopefully you can gain some value from it. If not, I'm sorry I wasted your time. So let's get started. I'm going to show you my overall project. I think it's good to start mixing with a goal in mind. So I am huge on referencing. If you look here, I have a reference track at the top of my project. I always use a reference track. And the goal I was aiming for on this record was I really wanted to get the sound that Brian Hood got on Era's Augment record. If you haven't listened to that record, take a little time to listen to it. First of all, it's musically really, really good. And second of all, the mix is just stellar. I'm not saying that I actually fully achieved that sound, but I think I got it pretty decently close to where I'm pretty happy with it. If you could A and B my record with Augment's record, you'll definitely hear some similarities. It won't be exact, but you'll definitely hear similarities in the tone and the way it's mastered and all that stuff. So I constantly up here in my reference track have one of the songs from the Augment record just to kind of reference back to at all times. But today in this video, this is going to be the first part of the series, I'm going to show you how I mixed drums to some degree on this new record. The second disclaimer I wanted to tell you is that this project I'm showing you is actually not the project from The Veil That Conceals. This is a different project, but I'm essentially mixing it the exact same way. So you're still getting all the exact same information on how I did it, but it is a different project. So if you don't recognize any of the drum patterns or anything like that, that's why, or any of the guitars later on in a future video. So let's start with drums, and I'm going to start off showing you what I actually use in terms of the samples, because I think the samples are probably the most important part. Let's start with, and I keep this pretty simple. So here's my drums. It's in a folder, and I just have these 4 tracks. The first thing is my kick drum, and I call it the Crush Kick because I made this sample and it's totally custom. I recorded using a Crush kick drum, and I think we used a D112. Actually, no, that's not true. We used the Shure mic for it, mixed with an i5, an Onyx i5, and so we used 2 mics on it, but regardless, that's irrelevant. So it's a totally custom kick. Now you can actually get this kick drum. You can, if you want it, you can email me. I do sell the kick and actually an entire sample pack, but I'll put my email in the post so you can, if you want it, you can have it. But I'll show you how I mix it. Like I said, unfortunately, it's going to sound like not as good because it's coming through my studio monitors into my mic. But essentially, here is the drums. So it's really thick. It's got a thick, meaty bass, and then there's a nice grit to it in the upper end. It sounds really good. I'm using Drumagog to trigger this with MIDI. Nothing too fancy there, but let me show you how I processed it. Let's go to my EQ, which is right here. I'm using a Waves EQ. It's extremely simple. The reason this EQ is so simple is because I basically pre-processed this kick when I made it. But here's some extra processing I've done that if you pick this kick up, you can use these exact same settings on the kick, and I think it'll sound really, really good for you. So using Waves, first of all, I dipped out the middle at 500 because it was just kind of, it just sounds flat and boxy and to some extent. So I took 6 dB out with a 5Q here. which definitely added more depth to the kick. And then all I did was do a 40B boost at 7,000, so just a shelf boost right here at 7,000 kilohertz. So the EQ is extremely simple. Going down to the low end, though, to kind of boost the low end a little bit, I've got C4 here, and I've got two of them running back to back, and here's why. Let me show you the first one. The first one, if you notice, all this is bypassed, and it focuses only on the low end below 50 hertz. And I'll show you the settings here. The threshold is set just to -80 all the way, maximum. The range is at -15. The attack is at 0.50. And the release is at 15. So that's essentially just compressing those low end frequencies. Now, this is going to seem counterintuitive, but I promise you it works. I don't know why this is so effective, but another engineer, a friend of mine who's extremely talented, showed me this. He runs another version of C4, and so I've been doing it kind of ever since. Although he's taking out the low end on this one, with this C4, he's actually boosting it and I boost it at 150. Again, all these are bypassed on this upper end. I'm just using it for the low end. Using at 150 with a threshold at -27. Gain at 5. Range at 7. Attack at 65.16 and release at 64.86. I don't know if you can hear this or not, but I'll do it with I'll play this real quick with the C4 on and off, and hopefully you can hear a difference. If not, I apologize. So this is with it off. Okay, so it's just extremely more full, and it's punchy with the low end really well controlled. So that's the kick drum. Like I said, I'll have that available. All you have to do is email me, and I can provide you that sample. I'm running MIDI into that, so that's how that's working. For cymbals, I'm actually using a Superior drummer, but that's all I'm using for is just the cymbals, and I'm using the Metal Foundry. Okay, nothing else, just for cymbals. In fact, I think in this mix, I'm literally only using this for the ride cymbal, and I think that's it. But I did on the Veil That Conceals just use Superior for the cymbals, the Metal Foundry. There's some EQ and stuff like that going on here. I don't think it's really that important. All I would do on the cymbals here is basically cut out everything below 500 hertz, and maybe do a slight boost on the up end above 7,000. Coming down to my actual drum kit, which is basically all the samples I use here. I don't want to get too fancy with you, but let's look. The first thing is my snare. Okay, this is the main sample that I use. This is called the Nashme Fire Snare from, I believe, Seraph Drums. I'll try to put a link for you to get that. I highly recommend picking it up if you don't have it already. It's just a great sample. To show you some of the settings, I think I have the room mic set at -3.5 here, and then I'm not going to show you how I route everything through here because it would take way too long. But essentially, using this sample is what I focus on primarily. It's doing the heavy bulk of the snare. The other sample I use, again, is a totally custom one that comes in the pack that you can get from me if you want. It's called the Tama Steel Shell Drum Snare, and it's awesome. It adds a little extra crack and thickness to it. It's actually really good for like death metal and stuff, but even though this isn't a death metal record, to blend it in with the Nashme Fire Snare, it sounds really good. On toms, again, these are samples that I'm calling them the periphery toms 1, 2, and 3, because I actually got these from through the grapevine through a friend who knows the individual who actually mixed the Periphery 2 record, so I've been using those toms. Honestly, they're not really that great. I've got toms that I think are actually better than those. I've just been using them to test them out and to see if I can actually make them sound good, and I'll show you how I process those in a minute. And then I've been using a cymbal pack also from Joey Sturgis. I think these are called the Truth Custom Emerald cymbals. This is a really, really old pack, and again, they're actually not that great, but they're not horrible either. You can really make decent stuff you know, anything really sound good if you've got you take the time and the effort. So this is what I'm essentially using, but I'm going to focus on the snare first since we just focused on the kick. So I'm using these two samples together, right? They're blended together. Now I'm going to show you how I process this. Everything else, instead of processing it directly on the track like I did the kick drum, I actually process it down here in a group track. So I've got my drum main group track, a tom's main group track, a kick one, which is literally nothing. It's just all I have on that is a limiter which controls volume. And I have it sent to a parallel compression thing I'll show you here in just a minute. But other than that, there's nothing on it. So let's go to the snare. How I do the snare. Here's what I'm running on the snare. The first thing is I'm running is Decapitator by Sound Toys, which is just distortion. And I've got Punish set to on. The dry is, I don't know, it's not quite to 50%. I got a little bit of a low cut here. The brightness is up just a little bit. I've got the high cut set all the way up, so there's basically nothing there. And then the dry I've set to 4, and this is actually kind of important. I have it set on the E channel. The E channel just sounds the best to me for metal in particular. So this is just applying distortion to your snare. It's just going to make it come more alive. The second thing is I have the SSL compressor. Attack set to 0.1. Ratio at 4. Release is set to auto. And then the threshold is at 16.9. But basically, let's just look at it and see how much gain reduction I'm getting. Okay, I'm not even getting, I'm getting maybe 2 dB of gain reduction, so it's not much. This is just there to kind of even things out a little bit more than they already are. Again, that's 0.1 for auto, and I'm just adding 1.5. Basically, what I'm getting, all my gain reduction, I'm adding that back. Let's go to my envelope shaper. I'm just using the Cubase envelope shaper. Attack is set to 8.0. Length at 24.5, the release at 1.8, and then the output is at negative 1.6. Again, this just adds a little bit more, mostly attack to the snare, gives it a little more aggressiveness. And then let's look at the EQ, which honestly I think is really what makes the whole thing. And that goes for everything in this mix. EQ is, for me, probably 80 to 85% of what makes the mix good on if you're EQing every instrument properly. So let's look at it. It's really not that complicated. I'm using Isotope Ozone 4, but only just for its EQ function. Let's see if I can pull up, show the info. Yeah, here we go. So on the low shelf at 83 Hertz, I have boosted it 1.3 dB with a 24Q. For the second, number 2 here, I've got a little boost at, another 1.3 boost at 268 Hertz with a 0.5 Q. At 404 Hertz, I have a 0.6 dB boost with a 3.1 Q. At 708 Hertz, I have a negative 3.5 dB cut at 6.1 Q. I have a cut, again, a pretty big cut at basically 1200 Hertz of negative 8.3 with a 1.7 Q. And then I cut again a little bit at about 7,755 Hertz, negative 1.7 dB. And then I have a high shelf at 2,900 Hertz, essentially, boosting 3.1 dB with a 4.6 Q. And it looks like this. The reason it looks kind of extreme right here, it just goes up, is because when I was listening to the Era record, I noticed that Brian's snares have a tremendous amount of snap, and I wasn't really able to get that snap with an envelope shaper. Maybe that's what he does, I don't know. But the best way to achieve the kind of snap to the snares that he has on like the Era record, or really any of his records that he does, is to have this really, I noticed, thin Q right here, really high, almost at 17,500 hertz, and that gives an extra snap to the snare that I wasn't able to get without doing that. So again, there's no right or wrong way to make a sound. This may look ridiculous to somebody, but that's exactly what I've done. And then I've got G clip down here, which just clips the snare a little bit. Yeah. Moving over here, I've sent the snare to an FX channel, which is down here. I'll show you right here, which is essentially my parallel compression. All right, and I'm using C1 on here, waves C1 on here. This is my parallel compression settings, which is basically just smashing the shit out of it. I have a set at a negative 40.1 threshold with a ratio of 6:1, attack of 0.10, and release of 50, makeup gain of 25. All one. So you notice there when the snare and the toms are playing, basically they're getting almost negative 24 or 25 dB of gain reduction. The kick not as much. The kick's not sent to it very hard. The kick is about 3 or 4, but that's not really that significant, I don't think. But it does play a huge role in how energetic the drums sound overall. So I can kind of take this off. Yeah, so that's a massive change, just adding that parallel compression there with C1. The next thing I'll show you is, so that's how I process the snare. The next thing I'll show you though is the toms, how I process the toms. I know everybody processes toms, all different. Some of, you EQ the first time one way, the second time another way, and the third time another way. I'm just too lazy, apparently. I just don't feel like doing all that because I think there's got to be a general EQ. I could probably make better mixes if I would do that, but I don't. The first thing I do is I just add a little bit of reverb because I honestly, for these toms samples that I showed you, I don't have a room sample for them, at least not a good one, and I'm too lazy to make one. So I've added a little bit of reverb using the free plugin called Ambience. You can download this anywhere, and actually this is a super valuable plugin, at least for me, when it comes to creating ambience with guitars, which I can maybe show you later. One of the things people said about the album was how cool all the ambient sounds were, which is actually mostly all guitars using this reverb plugin. The settings really aren't all that important. I basically just use the drums wide preset and then just adjusted the wet setting how it needed to be adjusted. What is important, though, to really any tom samples is the EQ, and I'll show you my general EQ here. And this is what it essentially looks like. I'll show you the settings. At 42.4 hertz, I have a negative 6.5 dB low shelf, 8.6 Q. I don't think the Q really matters, though. At 157 hertz, I have a 9.4 dB boost with a 1.0 Q. At 272 hertz, I have a negative 4 dB cut at 2.0 Q. At 654 hertz cut, negative 10.3 dB, 1.7 Q on that one, on that cut. At 2,584 hertz, I have a boost of 2.9 dB with a 1.1 Q. At 5,197 hertz, I have a 14.2 dB boost because obviously the toms needed substantially more brightness in this range. With a 0.84 Q. At 9,656 hertz, I have a 6.7 dB boost with a 1.7 Q. And so if you notice here, essentially, I cut out the very low ends, made a little boost here, which creates some body in the toms, cut out this mid-range, which makes it sound like you're hitting a cardboard box, and then I boosted the high end substantially on the toms. So you can try those settings out and see how they work for your toms, but obviously every tom is a little bit different. But I do firmly believe that in a lot of cases, If you have good samples, these type of settings will work for you, at least get you something decent. And then on I can show you my drum main processing, which is basically nothing. Again, just a little bit of compression here. I have so I'm getting about 3 dB of compression just to kind of even all my drums out. Threshold at negative 8.7 to achieve that. Attack of 0.1. The ratio is set to 2, and the release is set to auto with the SSL bus compressor. Again, you may look at this and say this is really inefficient or whatever it is, but I'm just showing you what I do. If you want any of these samples, like the kick drum sample, let me know, or the snare drum sample that I use as a layer, which is the Tama sample that I made myself. Also, let me know. I can provide that in the sample pack that I have created for this. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I do on drums. It's not very complicated. I guess I could show you probably something else for how I process the room. So this is actually the room sample for the snare. I guess I should have done this with the snare. I apologize for my inefficiency on this video. For the room sample on the snare, let's go with this EQ first. I've just boosted up about 8.7 dB with a 7Q at 7,389 kilohertz here. But I've also added the C4 for thickness with the snare, because I like a thick snare. And it's almost similar to what I did here with the kick drum. I use the same technique with the snare. All these muted, but at a 100 hertz, I'm cutting out, or I'm compressing down the low end on the snare. Range is -8. Attack is 34.99. The release is 40.27 with the threshold set to -69. Yeah. And then over here, just to kind of boost the low end on the snare a little bit. I know a lot of people cut low end on snares. I find myself boosting the low end on snares a lot. This is set to 94, but you could just set it at 100 with a threshold of -27. Gain at 4, range at -8, attack at 34.99, and a release at 40.27. So these are the 2 versions of C4 I run on the snare room sample, which is with the Nashme Fire snare. And that's pretty much it. That's how I do my drums. It's extremely simplistic. It's not really that complicated, because if you start with good samples right off the bat, it makes it a lot easier. You don't have to do nearly as much to get it to sound good. So hopefully this was helpful. I'll try to make another video here in the future. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the post, and I'll try to answer those better. I'll make another video on guitars next, and basically how I achieve the guitar tones, at least the heavy guitar tones, for the record. So thanks for watching. Hopefully this was valuable.